Hello and welcome to Speaking About Speaking with me, Jackie Goddard. And as you can see from the screen, I have Harry Duran with me today. Hi, Harry.
Hey, Jackie. Thank you so much for inviting me today to the show.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I suddenly thought I've never had to pronounce your surname before. Is it Duran, as in Duran?
As in Duran. Yes, and
Yeah.
that is a cultural reference that less and less people get the older I get.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I have to say I was a big fan back in the day.
Yes.
So Harry is here with me today. You are a podcast host and an agency owner.
Yes.
So you, if I'm right in saying, you spent about 20 years working in the marketing departments of JPMorgan and E-Trade before deciding to give it all up and become a podcast host. And I understand from what I've read that was down to your love of electronic music. So tell us a little bit about how that started and why the switch from corporate life to hosting a podcast.
So, thanks again for the opportunity to share your stage. I never take those invitations lightly, having, been on other stages before, having had people come to speak on my show. I know how valuable people's time is. And so I always value those opportunities. The story with electronic music, I would say, is probably my first passion, house music. So I grew up in New York in the 80s and just around the time house music started. So I learned literally how to DJ on vinyl. And I still have my turntables, so I get to practice every now and then at home, and I learned to beat match. And then I was just interesting to tie it to podcasting. I remember the first time I saw a DJ, what I was fascinated by was his ability to control the energy in a room. And I noticed that as he was playing music, the crowd was responding, and he would play something good. The crowd gets uplifted. The energy of the room gets lifted up. You don't play the right song, energy drops, people leave the dance floor. And I was like, well, that's fascinating, this idea of like controlling the energy. And that's sort of a lot of what drew me. I do love to go out and dance as well. And so that's been a passion for many years and sort of like a hobby. And then in 2012-ish, I worked on a mobile app with a friend of mine called Know Your DJ. And it was just sort of like a Pandora, but for DJs, electronic music, because I wanted to learn more about the artist that I loved, and I thought maybe I'd start a podcast. So I went to a podcast conference called New Media Expo in Las Vegas in 2014, January 2014, and the tracks were podcasting, YouTube, and blogging. So that'll tell you what was big at the time. And as I was there, I was attending all the podcast sessions, and I noticed that I was fascinated by all these podcasters and how they started the show. And I remember one of the speakers asking, "Who is a podcast junkie?" And I remember raising my hand because at the time I had about 20 or 30 podcasts. I was learning all about mobile apps and entrepreneurship and digital marketing. I dove deep into this world. And when I got back home, I realized, you know what, it might be easier, rather than chasing worldwide DJs around and trying to get an interview with them, why don't I interview podcasters? And I had also studied a little bit of acting in New York when I lived there. And I remember this show called Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that show. And what was fascinating to me about that show, Jackie, was the fact that James would have an hour with an actor who you'd just previously seen on the screen. You know nothing about this person. You just see, them acting on the show or movie. But in the show, he would get to ask questions, personal questions, and deep dive into, what makes them tick. And I said, that's fascinating. I'd love to do that for podcasters, sort of like behind the mic. The stories behind the microphone. And that's how my first show got started, Podcast Junkies. And it's interviews with fascinating podcasters from around the world. You've graced my stage as well. And thank you for that opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing that episode soon. And it was just a fascinating way, not only to learn, and I'm sure you've experienced this with podcasting yourself, but, to learn from my guests at the same time that I was bringing their stories to my audience. And so that sort of kicked off my podcasting journey. And then I was in that corporate world. I was in corporate marketing for about 20 plus years, JPMorganChase and E-Trade. And the writing was on the wall. I was doing some consulting towards the end of that, my 9-to-5 life. And I realized, new people were being hired. I was probably going to be pushed out at some point because that wasn't my passion. And so I had to figure out very, very quickly what I was going to do next. And I started joining these masterminds, these business masterminds. And in that world of digital marketing, it was something that was brand new to me. I was paying a coach $1,500 a month to like learn this world, which is a really big sum of money at that time. And thankfully, I was able to do that from the money from my corporate job. And it was like swimming in the deep end. And Jim Rohn, he's a famous speaker. He says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I went into that world and I encountered these 6-figure, 7-figure business owners. I was completely like blown away. I didn't know this world existed. I called it digital Narnia. I was like, wow, like how do you do this? People were bragging about their $30,000 a month revenue months. And I was like, how are you doing this? And so I just dove deep in there and I realized I needed to learn this world. And that's how my agency started, because I started offering services to these people who, knew what an hour of their time is worth, and they'd rather work with someone. They were paying this coach obviously to learn, something quicker than they could learn on their own. And in that way, that's how my agency Fullcast was started. And since then we've launched over 120 shows for clients since then. So wow. I'll pause there.
Wow. There's a lot in there. Just before we go back on that, let's just say hello to Amy. Amy Fagan says, love this conversation. Brilliant. Thank you, Amy.
Oh, that's my friend Amy, yes.
You know Amy?
Yeah, I do. And Dustin as well. Yeah.
Yeah, behind the mic. And that's it, exactly. Behind the mic, we're finding out. So, yeah, obviously you weren't passionate. There wasn't a passion for the marketing. And obviously you understood that. And the people that you were working for obviously understood that as well. So you went into the entrepreneurial world. But when you were talking to these people about, making all of this money and how they did it, did you automatically see that podcasting could be monetized?
No, not at that time, because it was challenging, because my show was more of a very niche show. Imagine it's a podcast about podcasting, super meta. And some of the popular hosts at the time were really making money from what's called a CPM model. And just a little bit of education for people who are not as familiar with podcasting. There's several ways to make money as a podcast host. One of them is through the ads model, and it comes from the advertising world. CPM, the M is the Roman numeral M, so it's 1,000, so it's cost per 1,000. So for every 1,000 downloads, a sponsor will pay you a certain amount of money, and the going rate nowadays is about $25 US. So if you get 10,000 downloads on your show, you'll get $250 per episode. Naturally, 10,000 downloads, by the way, is a very, very good, as any podcaster will attest to. But,
if only.
Yeah, if only. But $250, a week for, a weekly show is about $1,000 a month, which is not a sustainable business. So you really have to get into the 100,000s, millions of downloads. And this is where you start to hear about the Tim Ferrisses, the Jordan Harbingers, the Joe Rogans, who can make money off of that revenue model because they're getting into the millions. And so for me, I realized I wanted to focus more on helping people get their shows up who had a business already. So a lot of the people in that mastermind were coaches. They had high-end ticket, offers. They had webinars. They had coaching programs that, they were offering programs that cost thousands of dollars. So I said, look, all you need is a couple of sales, but forget about trying to get an external sponsor. You should look to get your own services offered. And this is really important. This is what we do with clients now, to let them know, let your listeners know that you have a service to offer. Let them know that, you have something, you have that ad slot. And so it's important education for new podcasters who might think, I'll start a show, I'll get sponsors right away. It's not easy. And I'll talk a little bit about my second show, which is actually sponsorship driven. And not ads driven. And that was really a real turning point, but an education process for my clients too, because I would have to educate them. But I was taking a lot of things off their plate that are not their genius. Really, there's four types of tasks. Those you're competent at, those you're incompetent at, those you're competent at, those you're excellent at, and then you're genius, right? Incompetent and competent tasks, very quickly you need to get those off your plate, because you shouldn't be doing those. And you think about taking your car through the car wash, or having someone, come and clean your house, or, these little tasks that you have one-off people do. The excellent tasks is where business owners get stuck, because it's something that's you're really good, or maybe you have a little bit of training on, but you're not the expert. And I learned this about 4 or 5 years ago when I had something wrong with my website, and it was the sidebar, it was a little graphic that needed changed. Jackie, I spent probably like 4 hours just stuck in WordPress,
in there.
trying to figure it out. And then I just broke down. I said, I think I know a WordPress expert, a friend of mine through a group. I reached out to him. We got on the phone. He literally fixed it in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is your genius, not my genius. And it was a very big aha at the moment. Like, focus on your genius, focus on those tasks that you are best in the world at. And that was really the aha. And I said, when I create this agency, I'm going to do that for my clients. Take all the tasks off their plate that are not their genius so that they can do their best work.
Yeah. And it must be, well, interesting then if you're working with coaches. Obviously, my background being speaking and getting people on stages and in front of cameras and speaking to their audience. This is the podcast for me is for that. But I would imagine, and I'd like to think I'm not too bad at actually doing that sort of side of things. Everything else, it's total incompetence. But it must be interesting then to talk for Podcast Junkies to podcast hosts that have no kind of background in acting or broadcasting or speaking or interviewing. How do you cope with them when you're dealing with people that don't have that? If that's not their zone of genius, then that's awkward, isn't it, for a podcast?
Yeah, as far as speaking, what's interesting, what I found fascinating, and over the years, I've also taken speaker training, which has been extremely helpful for me. And, just this idea of finding your voice. And so over the years, it's been interesting how I'm fascinated by how podcasting allows people to find their voice, really. And on the show, I was really an admirer of some of those earlier folks I mentioned, Terry Grosses, even the Larry Kings, the people who are able to have these long form conversations. And it really came down to learning over time. In the beginning, like every podcaster, I'm looking for a piece of paper here, but I have my list of questions and I'm saying, hey, Jackie, what's your favorite, what's your spirit animal? What do you like? What's your morning routine? And just these stock questions that you'd ask everybody. Over time, as every podcaster knows, it's just better when you can have a conversation. It's not a Q&A. I tell my guests now when they come on the show that it's really, it's not an interview, it's a conversation.
Yes.
And I always remind everyone I speak to, whether it's clients or students or other podcasters, that there's in a podcast conversation, in this conversation, there's three people involved. There's the host, there's the guest, and then there's the listener or the viewer in this case. There's always, that dynamic happening. And the people who are watching, the Amy's and the Dustins of the world, they should feel like they've pulled up a bar stool and they're just sitting here watching us have this conversation. But that, as you know, and I'm sure can attest to, it's an acquired skill over time. You have to be naturally curious. You have to pay attention to your guest. You have to, be entirely focused on them throughout the conversation, and then just pull threads, whatever you find interesting about them, because the listener and the viewer are also paying attention and they're hoping that you're going to dig deep on some of those topics that are mentioned.
Yeah. Well, talking about the listener, well, Amy and Dustin especially, if there's any questions or any comments that you'd like to make, then please feel free. This is kind of interactive, so I'd love to hear from you out there if you're listening or watching. And also, if you watch the replay on YouTube or LinkedIn, then please do leave a comment or ask a question, because we'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
So what advice then do you give people starting out with a podcast now? Because it seems like anybody that's running a business of any kind, they kind of need a podcast, don't they? Do you think?
I'm a firm believer. There's a bunch of different reasons for starting one, but really this idea of being comfortable in your own skin and having conversations. And you could be a solo podcast. It doesn't have to be an interview-based show, but Jackie, I think you would agree that this is a skill. For me, it's been transformational. Podcasting has changed my life. Like since 2014, when I think about the show and the agency and the connections, and I've spoken on stage at Podcast Movement, Podfest. We are podcasts in Australia. I just have so many doors that have been opened, and I've connected to so many people in the podcasting space in the world. I think of podcasting as my virtual stage. So now if I want to have a conversation with someone in the podcasting space by virtue of a podcast called Podcast Junkies, I can almost invite anyone on to come on, and they'll look at the show. They'll see I've published over 300 plus episodes, 340 plus episodes. So I'm serious about what I'm doing. I'm showing no signs of slowing down, and it's really this opportunity to showcase them and the work that they're doing. So I'm really a big proponent of people just getting started. Your first episode, it's going to sound awkward. No one likes the sound of the recorded voice. It's just a fact. The first time you hear it played back, it's jarring because you're used to hearing it in your own head. Yeah. Your 10th is going to sound better than your first. Your 50th is going to sound better than your 10th. You just have to put in the repetitions, and over time, you'll get comfortable speaking to people. I notice when I'm in the real world, my podcasting hat kicks on, and I'll be talking to someone at a dinner party, and I'll start asking them questions like it's a podcast interview. And I don't know if you've experienced the same thing as well.
Yeah. It's that curiosity, isn't it? It's just lovely being curious, which is why I started mine in the first place, to be honest. For sure. Just nosiness. Ellen here listening, watching. Hi, Ellen. Yeah. I'm one of those people with little acting or speaking training, and Harry has been helping me find my voice. Yeah. Very important. Very important. So you said that you'd done a little bit of acting yourself.
Yes.
Did you never feel the urge to actually?
It was interesting because I was really fat. I got my headshots done when I was just out of college, and I think I can dig them up somewhere for a good laugh. But yeah, I studied Meisner technique with a teacher by the name of James Price in New York City, and it was 3 years. We did a little black box theater training, and it was really interesting because I remember the first time we were in doing some of the scenes, and we were just rehearsing, and he said, okay, he had me and another female actor in front of the room. And again, it's very small, very intimate. You're like in an enclosed space. There's probably 15 of us in the room, and he's like, okay, now strip down to your boxers and then get into bed together and then do this scene together. And it's really like intense because you have to like not think, because if you're going to be an actor, you're inevitably, you may come across those scenes. So it's really interesting, and it's really pushing the limits of like how comfortable you are in a small space. And I remember like, we would do repetition exercises, and we would have to like, think about like working on our emotions and really feeling something and not acting until you had the feeling come up. So it was really helpful, I think, over time in real life. Yeah. And I think I remember it was 99, because I remember it was the .com phase, and just when everything was kicking in, and I had someone reach out to me through a mutual friend about an opportunity to join a company at the time that was in the .com space. And that sort of me is, I'm a bit of a techie as well. And so there was some competing interests at the time, and I had to make a choice about whether I was going to continue acting. And it was going to involve a lot more work and a lot more investment of my time and money to take that to the next level. Yeah. So it was a tough decision at the time. But I love a good film with, really superb acting, and it just really blows me away every time I see something, and I get lost in the film, and I almost forget that I'm watching actors. And so I do have a true passion and a respect for really, really good acting.
Yes, I love it too. I went there. I've got headshots as well, which I could pull out, which are, decades old probably. Yeah. And last week I was teaching stunt trainees, so stunt performers that are training. They have to do an acting course. So I do a 5-day intensive acting training course with them, and they're the same. They come in on a Monday morning just kind of going, oh, what the hell is this all about? They're all sports people, they've all come from sport backgrounds. By the end of the week, they're Oscar winning. They're just, but it is, you kind of have to put them really outside of their comfort zone. And it's a very vulnerable thing, as you say. Strip down your box shorts and get at it and make the audience believe that you're actually doing it. It's quite,
I think it's an important skill, because it's something that can be translated to real life. This ability to get out of your own head. Yes. And forget about the fact that you may be judged for your appearance or the way you sound, and I think it's similar to public speaking, and that's why I took training, because it's one of the biggest fears everybody has. And even with the training, I remember a couple of talks that I gave after my training was done, and I gave the talk and I did well, but I felt like I literally had a ball of cotton in my mouth. And it was
been there too. Apparently, according to the Mental Health Institute, 73% of people are more afraid of speaking in public than they are of dying.
Yes.
Which is outrageous, isn't it? It's mad, absolutely mad. We've got Who we got? Amy's made another comment. Love talking with Harry. I mentioned on my socials that I felt like I had finally made it by being a guest on his podcast. And Harry is so easy to talk with and relatable, which is lovely. And Sam says, hey, Harry.
Oh, Sam Sethby, my friend from the UK as well.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, acting is fundamental. I think every single person in the world, no matter what they do for a living, should do some acting training, because I think it covers everything. It covers everything, and we all now, as you know, are our own marketing. We have to be our own, if you're running your business as an entrepreneur, whatever it might be, you need to be able to speak to your public.
And do it in a way that you can communicate ideas effectively. And we see the people that can do this, whether now it's on LinkedIn Live or whether it's your reels. And even me, as being someone who studied acting, I'm a bit self-conscious when it just comes to turning on the camera and talking, extemporaneously about something that just happened today. So I think it's never something that you perfect. I don't know that anyone is born a great actor or a great in front of camera, but it is a matter of doing the repetitions and also speaking to something that you're passionate about, because if it's something that's forced or you feel like it's, marketing related, over time, you're going to lose the passion for it. So if you are going to talk live or talk in front of a camera, have it be something that lights you up, because the viewer can tell. The viewer can tell if you're like, I've been posting photos about some chickens, that we were taking care of recently, and we're going to be getting our own. So it's just fun things to talk about and do things that light you up, because life is too short to just be trying to be, Instagram famous or trying to be an influencer just for the sake of being famous.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you say, you'll burn out, you'll get bored, and the audience will tell, and they'll switch off. They want to be in the presence of somebody that's actually exciting and enthusiastic and passionate. Otherwise, what's the point? That's when they want to engage. Yeah. Let's talk about your other passion then, because we've 10 minutes to go. I can't believe we've been talking for 20 minutes already. I want to talk about vertical farming.
Yes. So
how? Why? How?
One of my clients in late 2019 gave me a book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis. He's a visionary entrepreneur, talks about things that are happening in the future. And in the book, he mentioned vertical farming, which I thought was fascinating. I did some research, which led me to a book called The Future is Vertical Farming by a professor in Columbia University, Dixon Despommier. And I was sort of off to the races. I had the skill set to do long form interviews, and then we had the agency, so I knew how to produce a quality show. And I said, could I start a podcast about vertical farming? So this is really helpful, and it kind of kicks into the market. All the pieces came together, the marketing brain, the entrepreneurial brain. I said, could I create a sponsor-driven show? And so I said, I'm going to call it the most obvious name possible. I'll call it the Vertical Farming Podcast. And as you might imagine, people can very quickly figure out what the show's about. Verticalfarmingpodcast.com was available, so I quickly snagged that. Vertical Farm Pod, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I grabbed all the socials. I was essentially building these mini stages where I knew when the show and episodes were published, I would have all these socials available and quickly start to promote it on all those platforms. And then also, Jackie, I needed to make it high visibility because no one knew who I was in the space. So I said, I'm going to interview CEOs and founders specifically. So that's what I've been doing. And since 2020, I've published over 120 episodes. When this actually started during COVID, and I didn't plan it this way. So it was interesting because I thought it would have derailed the conversations and derailed the podcast. And I asked my first guest, David Farquhar, who's the ex-CEO of a company called IGS in Scotland, of all places. It's March of 2020. I said, do you still want to do this? He said, yes, let's do it. And, at the time, the world was just we were all just smaller and we were just all more connected because we were all going through exactly the same thing. This is something that'll probably never happen in our lifetime again. And we just had a really genuine conversation. Again, speaking to this fact that I had the skill set. I was ready. I knew how to have long form conversations. And people would say, how do you talk about vertical farming if you don't know anything about it with these CEOs? And I said, you just have to be curious. Just talk to them. Origin stories. I love origin stories. How'd you get into this? What's your background? Where'd you go to school? And by the time you know it, an hour's up. And at the time I asked them, I said, we're looking for sponsors for the show. We're speaking, it's specifically industry driven. It's going to be for people in this industry. It's called Vertical Farming Podcast. He connected me with his marketing person in Chicago. We had another great conversation. I said, how much were you paying at these conferences for these booths that you can't go to anymore? He said, oh, about $20,000. And in my mind, I did some rough math. I said, well, for $9,000, you can sponsor this show. It's called the Vertical Farming Podcast. I speak to the leaders of the industry. And he thought about it for a few minutes and he said, okay, let's do it. Mind you, Jackie, I had not released an episode yet. And so I was like, whoa, the light went off because all the pieces came into place. Because when in my time at E-Trade, I remember the finance people would come down and they say, hey, it's the end of the quarter. You have $100,000 in your marketing budget. If you don't use it, you lose it. And I just, so coming from that corporate background, sometimes podcasters think too small and they want a couple of $100s for their podcast episode promotion. But I said, look, these are people in marketing departments with significant marketing budgets. And anyone who's worked in the world of corporate knows that marketing dollars, look at the E-Trade. I was there for the E-Trade baby and Super Bowl ads. So clearly millions of dollars for, what they spent there. So, but what I did was create a vehicle for the industry for people, vertical farming companies. I did my research. I saw that these companies were getting funding, VC dollars of funding, millions of dollars in funding. And normally when you get funding, the first expense is marketing. Like you want to take that money and spend it on marketing. So all the pieces came into place. Since then, like I said, I've been flown to Dubai and to Germany to indoor farming conferences by people who decided to be a sponsor on the show, and so it's opened up so many different opportunities for me. And I've actually moderated panels in a conference in Germany, and now it's the #1 podcast in the vertical farming space. And so it's been crazy. 3 years ago, I had zero visibility in vertical farming. And now I was just at a conference in Las Vegas and someone came up to me because they saw my badge. It's like, Harry, you don't know me, obviously, but I know you. And I've listened to like 9 of your interviews on the drive up here, to the conference. I just want to tell you, like, I really am enjoying it. And so it's really just a, humbling experience when you can like add value and have these genuine conversations where people are saying, I'm getting value from this. I'm trying to learn about the industry, and your podcast has been extremely helpful to do that. So it's really just another testament to the power of podcasting and just, going all in on a specific niche.
Niche. Talk about niche. I mean, you say obviously #1 vertical farming podcast. How many are there?
There's not that many. That's the thing, and what's interesting, Jackie, is I didn't really do that much research into what else was there. It's sort of this idea of like your blinders, like a racehorse, right? They've got the blinders on because they don't want to be distracted by what's happening next to them. And it's that same mindset. I know what I'm doing. I'm confident in my ability to get visibility for this show. I know I can produce a high quality show, so I'm going to do just that. And I just made it very easy to find. And people would tell me, I was looking for a show about vertical farming and I found yours. Well, that was intentional because that's exactly what it's called. And it's been, very fascinating to see the feedback as well.
I mean, that's an amazing story for anybody wanting to start a podcast to listen to. Yes. I mean, I assume though that you have a passion for vertical farming.
Yeah, over the years it's just been interesting but I wanted to learn on the way, and that's what I've been doing. So, and I've learned so. In the beginning I was just feeling, I was definitely in over my head, but I was just trying to relate to the persons. And now that I've started attending conferences and I'm just learning more every day. And I couldn't predict this because through COVID, the impact of supply chain disruptions is a real thing, and that was affecting people's ability to have access to fresh food. And then with the Ukraine war and access, supply chain disruptions and people, that last mile of food and the concept of food deserts. I was in Dubai in the UAE. They get 95% of their food imported. And this is really like top of mind for many, many people now. Yeah. We're losing a lot of arable land, and it's not the be all end all. It's not the end solution. But you'd be surprised at all the different things you can now grow. They're growing seedlings for trees, hops for beer, insects for food, fodder for camels in the UAE. Just you name it, they've been attempting to grow it indoors. It started with leafy greens and strawberries now, but it's really expanded, and the potential for what's possible. Even research companies are researching plants and doing analysis, and they need to do that in a controlled environment. So it's really fascinating.
And it's stacked. It's literally up to the ceiling kind of.
It depends
farming.
on
is that right?
Yeah, it could be anything from a container farm, which is a shipping container, to a factory-sized, building with robots, picking crops and scanners and, AI technologies, infrared cameras looking at leaves and to see where there's pathogens on the plants, and hydroponics, automatically controlled, and just Wi-Fi systems monitoring what's happening in the farm as well. So it's a lot of technology involved as well, but also, a lot of opportunities to grow different crops.
Yeah. Well, I hope that governments are getting involved, and this is something that we'll all see a lot more of. Yeah. Well, I can't believe we've done our half an hour already, Harry. It's been incredible talking to you. So interesting. Last question, though. You've been to many conferences and stood on many stages yourself. You've obviously seen a lot of speakers. So can you, in your opinion, tell me what makes a good speaker good and a bad speaker suck?
I think what makes a good speaker good is to have a message without a intention to try to be the best speaker in the world and try to affect everybody in the room and try to just wow them. Too many speakers I feel are performative and they're trying to show off on stage. My intention when I'm on stage, whether it's an actual stage or a virtual stage, it's just to impact one person who needs to hear that specific message at that specific time. And it's happened so far every time since I've spoken, because you're speaking from the heart. You have to speak genuinely. You have to show people some vulnerability. You have to be able to, show them that it's not, just because I'm on stage doesn't mean that I've lived a better life than you. It's just that I've, just decided to do some training to be up here. But I've gone through my ups and downs. I've had my highs and my lows, and I'm sure I'll continue to have them. But I'm speaking to everyone that's watching this, everyone that's listening, and in the future, just to be genuine and just be relatable to people, because at the end of the day, you never know who's listening. You never know who needs to hear your story. And I'm a firm believer that everyone has a voice inside them that needs to be heard. And I don't want people to wait, the 30 years that I did to finally, put all the pieces in place to share my story. Share your story, whether it's to one person or whether it's to 1,000, because you're not the one to decide whether your story is going to be relevant. It's the person that's listening. Absolutely. And they realize they're going to take that one nugget of information and they're going to say, wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear right now in this moment. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm just always conscious of that. I'm sort of getting out of my own way, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree. And I love, the bits of the podcast that I've listened with you hosting, or even when you've been guesting, you always talk to the one listener, your listener. I've heard you say that. So no, it is important that it is just you're doing it for that one person. And if somebody gets something from it, that's absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you for being on with me today, Harry. You've been an amazing guest. I've really, really enjoyed the last 30 minutes. It's been brilliant.
Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity, and continue to do what you do, because this opportunity to highlight, the stage that you're creating, these opportunities that you're creating for the people to share their stories, they're impacting people, whether they're just watching and commenting or just watching and maybe fly on the wall. Sometimes people, they'll get a nugget out of it. So anything that you do to share people's voices is always appreciated. So thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. And if you are watching on the replay, then again, do leave a comment and get in touch, because we'd love to hear from you. But once again, Harry, been fabulous having you here. Thank you very much. And I will see you guys next week.
Thank you, Jackie.
Bye.
Bye.